I'm sorry, it's just... I couldn't wait to tell you.
Quite so. What has happened?
She came to the pawnbroker's about an hour ago.
Lady Francis?
No. The man's wife this time. But the pendant she brought in was an exact match of the last one. She's a tall woman with pale eyes, like a ferret.
That is the lady.
I watched her from the back room, and when she left the shop, I followed her. She walked up Westminster Road, and I kept behind her. Presently she went into a shop. Mr. Holmes, it was an undertaker's.
Very well. Go on.
I followed her in. She was talking to the man behind the counter. "It's late," she said, or something like that. The undertaker was excusing himself. "It should have been there by now, only it took longer being out of the ordinary," he said. Then they broke off and stared at me. So I said something stupid about losing my way and left.
You did very well. What happened next?
When the woman came out, I was hiding in the doorway. I'm afraid her suspicions had been roused, for she looked about her, but she didn't see me, and walked off. I followed her again from a safe distance, till I saw her go into her house.
Did you take a note of the address?
Number 36, Pulteney Square, Brixton. I stayed where I was, and watched the house for some time. The windows were all dark, except for one room on the ground floor, but the blind was down, so I couldn't see in. I was just wondering what to do when a van drove up with 2 men in it. They carried something out of the van, up the steps into the house.
Did you see what it was?
I did. God help me, it was a coffin.
Good heavens.
I was on the point of rushing in after them, but I remembered my promise to you, and here I am.
You've done excellent work. But we can do nothing legal without a warrant. Watson, dash off a note to Lestrade explaining the latest developments and asking him to apply immediately for a search warrant.
They could be murdering her at this very moment.
Please try to control yourself, my friend. Now, while you take the letter to Scotland Yard, Dr. Watson and I will go at once to Pulteney Square. There's not a moment to be lost. Let us try to reconstruct the situation. The villains coaxed the unhappy lady to London and made her their prisoner. They've already begun to sell her jewellery, which seems to them perfectly safe, as they've no reason to believe that anyone's concerned about her fate.
But they must know that if she is released, she will denounce them.
Precisely, therefore she must not be released. And as they cannot keep her under lock and key forever, they have but one solution.
Murder.
Yet she is not to be disposed of in a hole in the back garden. They're preparing for a legal and official burial.
Which means putting her to death in a way that would deceive a medical man. Poison, perhaps. But it seems strange that they should take the risk of calling in a doctor to sign a death certificate.
Now, one moment, Watson. Stop the cab, driver.
Why are we stopping here?
We've just passed Bebbington's, the pawnbroker. This must be the undertaker's. Now, be so good as to go in and ask what time the Pulteney Square funeral takes place tomorrow.
Well, won't they think it rather odd?
No, not a bit of it. Your appearance inspires confidence. Now, be as quick as you can. Well, what did they say?
8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Drive on to Pulteney Square. So, there's no mystery. Everything's to be above board.
Yes, in some way. The legal procedures have been complied with.
Yes, well, there's nothing for it but a direct frontal attack upon the fortress. Are you armed?
Armed? No, I have my stick, that's all.
So let's hope we'll be strong enough. Thrice is he armed to have his quarrel just. So we certainly can't afford to wait for the police. We must take our chance, Watson. We've done more than once in the past.
Do you think this is wise?
We have no choice. The warrant won't come through till tomorrow, and by then it'll be too late.
Yes? What do you want?
Good evening, madam. I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, but it's a matter of some urgency. After you, Doctor.
Doctor? The doctor's already been. He signed the death certificate.
Did he, indeed? Nevertheless, we wish to speak to Mr. Schlesinger, sir.
You've got the wrong house. Take your foot out of the door. There's nobody by that name here.
Well, in that case, we'll see the man who lives here, unless Mr. Peters is afraid to face us. Well, madam?
My husband is not afraid to face any man in the world. You'd better come in.
What's going on here, Annie?
These men forced their way in. That one calls himself a doctor.
There's surely some mistake, gentlemen. I fancy you've been misdirected. Perhaps if you were to try further down the
Let's
street...
not waste any more time. You are Henry Peters of Adelaide, also known as the Reverend Dr. Schlesinger, recently arrived from Baden. I'm as sure of that as that my name is Sherlock Holmes.
Your name doesn't frighten me, Mr. Holmes. When a man's conscience is easy, you can't rattle him. What's your business in this house?
I want to know what you've done with the Lady Frances Carfax, whom you brought away with you from Baden.
I'll be very glad if you can tell me where that lady may be. I've a bill against her for nearly £100.
Yes, and nothing to show for it but a couple of trumpery pendants that the dealer wouldn't hardly look at.
She attached herself to Mrs. Peters and me at Baden.
Where you were passing yourself off under an assumed name.
I don't deny it, but that's no crime as far as I'm aware. The woman stuck herself onto us till we came to London. I paid her hotel bill and her travel tickets. Once we got here, she gave us the slip. And as my wife says, she left us some old-fashioned jewellery to pay her bills. Now, if you find her, Mr. Holmes, I'll be in your debt.
Oh, I mean to find her. In fact, I'm going through this house until I do find her.
Really? And do you have a warrant?
I have a loaded revolver in my pocket. That will have to serve until something better comes along.
Is that so? It strikes me you're nothing but a common or garden burglar.
Well, I might fit that description, certainly. And my companion is also a dangerous ruffian. Together, we propose to go through your house.
Annie, fetch a policeman.
Yes, Henry. Don't you dare touch me.
I wouldn't dream of it.
If you try to stop us, Peters, you will certainly get hurt. Now then, where is the coffin which was brought into this house?
What do you want with the coffin? You can't see it. It's in use.
In other words, there's a body in it, and we wish to see that body.
Never with my consent.
Well, then without it. Come, Watson, the front parlour.
On the table. We need a light.
With this candle. That's better. Now, lift the lid, Watson.
But this can't be... This aged, withered face.
Thank God, it's a different woman.
So you admit you've blundered, Mr. Holmes. Yes, you've blundered badly this time.
Who is this woman?
I don't know why I should tell you, but since you're so interested, she was Rose Spender, an old nurse of my wife's family. We found her at the Brixton workhouse and brought her here to end her life in peace and some comfort. She only lasted 3 days. Dr. Howson, of 13 Fairbank Villas, certified that her death was due to natural causes, senile decay. Would you agree with that opinion, Doctor?
Upon superficial examination, yes. It seems quite probable.
The funeral's to be carried out by Stimpson and Company of Westminster Road, who will bury her at 8 o'clock in the morning. Anything wrong with that, Mr. Holmes?
I can't say.
I'm sure you can't. And I'd give a good deal to have a photograph of your staring silly faces when you pulled aside that lid, expecting to see Lady Frances, and found a poor old woman of 90 instead.
Nevertheless, I must insist on going through this house.
Oh, yes? Well, we'll see about that.
Henry, this gentleman was waiting at the street corner. He's a policeman.
Plain clothes, eh? Good. Do your duty, officer. These men have forced their way into my house, and we can't get rid of them. This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and this
I
is...
already know Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson.
Lestrade,
I thought I might find you. But you must know you've no business here without a warrant.
Yes, I understand that.
What are you waiting for? Arrest them.
There'll be no necessity for that, sir. We know where to find Mr. Holmes if he's wanted. Come along, gentlemen.
Come, Holmes. We have to go.
Sorry about that, but the law is the law.
Certainly, Inspector. You had to do your duty.
I was on my way home when that chap arrived with your request for a search warrant. He told me where you'd gone, so I thought it might be best to take a hand in it myself before any awkwardness took place.
But we still feel certain the missing lady is in that house somewhere.
Yes, Doctor, but the warrant won't be signed till the morning. In the meantime, I'll keep a man posted out here to make sure they don't try and smuggle her out. So you might as well take yourselves off to Baker Street and get a good night's sleep.
Well, Holmes, did you manage to get any sleep?
Very little. To be so near and still fail. It's unbearable. You managed to speak to that doctor, what was his name?
Dr. Howson, yes. He wasn't best pleased at being woken at such an unearthly hour, but he confirms the story Peters told us. The old woman was an inmate of Brixton Workhouse.
Whether she'd been Mrs. Peters' old nurse, I very much doubt. And as to the cause of death...
Dr. Housen was with her when she breathed her last, and he signed the certificate. He assured me that everything was perfectly normal. There was no question of any foul play. Nothing in the house struck him as suspicious in any way.
Perhaps not, but there was something suspicious all the same. I know it. Oh, well, if only I... Good Lord. How could I have been so dim-witted? What time's the funeral?
8 o'clock.
What time's it now?
7:20.
Now, quick, man, hats and coats. If we're too late, I shall never forgive myself. This is a race against time.
What do you want? You can't come in here.
Into the parlour, Watson.
Don't you dare. The undertaker's busy in there.
Put down that coffin.
What the... Do you have a warrant for this
The
intrusion?
warrant's on its way, and the coffin remains in this house until it arrives. Are you the undertaker?
I am, but I must
Never mind that. I see you have a screwdriver. There's a sovereign for you if that lid comes off within 1 minute. Oh, let's help him, Watson.
Come away, my dear. This is no place for us.
This is an outrage,
Don't argue, man. Do as I say.
What's happening here? Mr. Holmes.
Come in,
I told
Lestrade,
you-
just in time.
There. That's the last one. Lift your side. It's giving.
Oh. Chloroform. Of course it would be.
And the face covered with cotton wool.
Yes, let me do that. There.
Is that her? Is that
Lady Frances Carfax. Yes. Is she alive, Watson?
It depends how long she's been shut in there, without oxygen. There may still be a spark of light within her. Stand aside, all of you.
Pray God we're not too late.
For some time, I was afraid we were too late. When her eyelids fluttered at last, it was something like a miracle.
Yeah.
And when Mr. Philip Green arrived...
No, I felt sure he wouldn't be far away. I fancy he has a better right to take care of her than anyone else.
Yes, indeed. So the funeral was able to proceed. And the poor old woman who lay in the bottom of that coffin was allowed to go to her final rest. Alone.
Yeah. Well, if you decide to add this strange case to your annals, let it be an awful warning. An example of the temporary eclipse to which even the best balanced mind may occasionally succumb.
What was it that put you on the right track, Holmes?
Well, last night I lay awake, haunted by the thought that somewhere a clue had come to my notice and had been too easily dismissed. Yes, in the grey light of dawn, a few words came back to me, the words of the undertaker, as reported by Mr. Green. It took longer being out of the ordinary. Why was the coffin out of the ordinary? Then I remembered the deep sides and that little shrunken figure at the bottom. Why so large a casket for so small a body? To leave room for a second corpse, both to be buried under the one certificate. Yes, damnably ingenious device.
During the confusion, I gather the precious pair managed to make their escape. No doubt they will soon be picked up.
Let us hope so, indeed. Though, of course, if they should escape the clutches of the law, it might prove to be interesting.
Interesting?
Yes, certainly. If our paths should cross a second time, the outcome might be very different. Yes. I await news of their future career with pleasurable anticipation.
In The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax, Sherlock Holmes was played by Clive Merrison and Dr. Watson by Michael Williams, with Jack Claff as the Honourable Philip Green. Inspector Lestrade was played by Stephen Thorne, Holy Peters by Peter Wickham, Mrs. Peters by Gilly Mears, Monsieur Moser by John Baddeley, Herr Brandt by Colin Pinney, Marie Devine by Rachel Atkins, and The Undertaker by William Maxwell. The violinist was Leonard Friedman. The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax was dramatized for radio by Peter Ling and directed by Enid Williams.